Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am so excited to be joined by Meera, Shah, and Rob MacDonald from Trey Education. If you're not familiar with Trey Education, they work with schools on a number of different consulting fronts. They do really great work, and I know we're going to learn a little bit more about them in a second. But I have had a chance, I've been kind of out on the speaking circuit. I've had a chance to connect with Meera a couple of times now. And we recently had this really cool conversation about okay, hold on, we had a conversation about scheduling, which is not necessarily something that I would typically bring to this podcast, but it didn't take me long to make the connection between a really intentionally well-designed schedule and what that can actually mean to word of mouth, right? And we all know that word of mouth is one of the most powerful marketing engines that independent schools have at their disposal. And it just makes so much sense. Like if you can intentionally design a schedule that really artfully creates a great scheduling environment for students and families, they may not be going out and having a conversation with their friends and be like, you should see their schedule. But, I have a sneaky suspicion that it does increase happiness at the school, which is really front and center when it comes to word of mouth. So with all that, we're going to get into it in much greater detail. But before we do, Meera and Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Hey, so I know we're going to get into this in a sec, but I'd love for you both just take a second if you can introduce yourselves and talk about the partnerships that Trey Education forms with schools. That would be terrific.
Happy to. My name is Meera Shah. I got my start in independent schools in the New England area, and I've always sort of been on the program-facing side of work, classroom teacher, department chair, academic dean, assistant head, those sorts of roles. And so have parlayed that and some other experiences into the work at Trey Education, which, as you said, we build responsive and relational partnerships with schools that are really looking to move their people and program forward. And that, again, mostly means that we're working with those program-facing folks, division directors, assistant heads, deans, that sort of thing. And we do the whole gamut of work. Anything that's going to touch faculty or program, we're happy to help schools with. And a ton of different kinds of programs, ranging from teacher leadership support to professional learning, curriculum, one-on-one administrative thought partnership. And as you mentioned, scheduling, and I think I know you said we'll dive in, but we really feel excited about the way that we can support schools in advancing what their values and their priorities are on their bigger picture through the lens of schedule. But I'm super excited to be here.
And Rob MacDonald, I spent my whole career really working with independent schools, from classroom to some various leadership roles. Meera and I overlapped at Beaver Country Day School. So that's how we got connected. And I guess what I would add is that in all the work that I've been doing with Trey over the last few years, these projects around schedule redesign are particularly fun because on one side, it's this super complicated puzzle that needs to be solved. And on the other side, you're getting to work with schools and think about their values and what the future might look like. And so these projects that meld those two worlds are especially rewarding. So yeah, thank you for letting us talk a little bit about the work we do.
Well, that's a great jumping off point for today's conversation. And I'm curious, when you think about the trends that you see as you're working with schools around schedule redesign, I think I heard of values, I heard what matters to you, but what do you feel like drives them to do that work and to partner with you?
Yeah. I think maybe I would put it into three buckets. The first sort of bucket of motivations that drive schools to think about a schedule redesign is because they're managing some challenges, some friction points. There's some pain that they're trying to mitigate, and that pain could be around transitions in the school day or staffing issues that are hard to manage with the current schedule. Questions around faculty, staff, student wellness. Community time doesn't quite feel right. Those sorts of kind of the coming in with a pain point question mark. Something isn't working for them. Another bucket that we see with schools looking to do schedule redesign is what you were talking about with that values-driven program alignment. So they might be saying, "Hey, we as a school are really committed to a certain kind of learning," or "Oh, we're all about place-based programming, and our schedule just doesn't let us get kids outside," or "We don't, we can't really do the interdisciplinary work that we believe so deeply in." Or we talk about meeting kids' individual needs, but the way we're currently doing support, we think we can do it better. And we want our schedule not only to like solve some problems, but actually to open up some new opportunities that will align with what our school is about and aspires to be about. Um, and that again, Peter, to your point, gets at why that word of mouth might happen related to a schedule redesign. One is the fewer problems you have, there's less to
Right.
fewer parking lot conversations, but also the greater you can bring those, what you're saying your school is about, your differentiating factors, and have your schedule actually make those possible. I think schools that are doing that, we really enjoy those opportunities. And then the last bucket, this is not a forever bucket, but we're still seeing some schools come to us looking for schedule redesign after some COVID residue. Like every school kind of upended their schedule in COVID and either had been working on something before or were hoping to make some changes, and then the pendulum swung or whatever the case was, and folks are just sort of like getting a little bit more reset in what they'd like their program to be about.
And I'd add that as people are resetting, one trend right now is that schools are juggling a lot of stuff. There's just a lot to navigate right now. And so over the last few years, that has led to some situations where schools have, found a bunch of little Band-Aid solutions to their schedules that don't really do the transformative thing that they're hoping to do. And sometimes those little Band-Aid solutions cumulatively create a real mess. Sometimes you've got schools that feel like they're working with this precarious house of cards, and if you
Yeah.
you fiddle with one little thing, the whole thing's going to come crashing down. So I think some of those cumulative tweaks have built up over time and um, led to more schools reaching out for the full redesign.
It strikes me, as you're talking about those three buckets, that all of them, there's a puzzle aspect to all of them, right? Like you do have to figure out how the pieces snap so that you get to whatever the objective is that the school may have. But you talk about how you frame it as an expression of schools' values and priorities. I'd love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit more because I find that such an intriguing perspective on scheduling.
Yeah, I mean the technical puzzle is fun for guys with a math background like me, but can be a real nightmare for schools, and it can often lead to conversations that are sort of a tug of war. One department pulling for one thing, you've got a finite amount of time, and so you end up having these tensions within the school when if you can get to a conversation about values and priorities, now you've got the potential for everybody to be working together towards a shared vision. So that's really more the direction that we try to go in. If you're just doing the technical stuff, you're probably not going to get transformative results, and you might even fall into perpetuating that cycle of low band-aids. But I can give you kind of an example of what it might look like for a school to step back and think more big picture. So let's imagine that you've got a school that has figured out that they really want to prioritize student mental health. They really care about interdisciplinary learning. So they might end up with a schedule that's got fewer classes per day to reduce some of that anxiety and cognitive load for kids. Longer blocks that allow them to do some of that interdisciplinary work and dig a little bit deeper. Even blocks of time that allow teachers to collaborate with one another so that they can plan some of those collaborative interdisciplinary activities. Meanwhile, you might have another school that after doing some exercises with us to identify priorities, they say, hey, we really want to be leaning into empathy, community engagement, real world learning. And Meera was getting at this before, but that might lead to a schedule that's got, Wednesdays really set aside for field trips, or that's got sort of a like interim Jan plan structure that allows them to do these in-depth projects during a portion of the year. Um, that's the kind of conversation that you can have if you get beyond the technical side.
And, and Peter, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are very familiar with the distinction between an adaptive challenge or an adaptive problem and a technical problem. And I think part of the values and priorities piece is allows us to help schools treat this as an adaptive issue, which really makes it about the people and the process much more than, trying to get the jigsaw pieces to fit. And so that when we come with values and priorities, it's really because we're treating it as an adaptive change management process, not just a puzzle to be solved.
It strikes me there are a lot of similarities between what you just described in terms of taking an adaptive approach, people process, making it centered around people, and the work that schools do around strategic planning. I mean, basically what I just heard you talk about is a very similar approach that lots of schools take to strategic planning. So it just makes sense that you would then apply that to the thing that drives like literally every minute on your campus, right? And some may argue is the best way to, deliver on, core components of your strategy. Am I thinking about that the right way?
I mean, when we work with schools, we kind of go through a 5-part process, and the very first phase it's called discover, right? We're listening and learning. And a good accreditation or a good strategic planning process will start the same way. Let's really get to know what's here. Everything, of course, like what are the sacred cows and the carpool, traffic flow issues that are going to affect dismissal. But also, what's the culture of the school? What are the unspoken values? And so that, we can certainly talk through those 5 phases, but I just want to emphasize that part of why we do the work the way we do is, or we're able to address it as an adaptive question because we take the time to get to know schools really well. So yeah, I think there are some overlaps there.
It strikes there's like another overlap that kind of comes to mind, and that is, I've been out talking about the business model for a couple of years now, and one of the things that you see schools, it's a really, I have a lot of empathy because I understand why this happens, but they look at the competition, right? And it could be the independent school down the street, it could be the public schools charter, whatever the competition is, and they see, oh, wow, they're doing that thing. We need to do that thing too in order to be competitive. And so then they launch the thing or the things. And what I've seen happen is that you start to spread yourself too thin, that wheels start to spin, and you just don't get the traction that you're hoping for. So I guess, as you're working with schools, I mean, it seems like there's a logical place there for you to help schools like pressure test that. And like, do we need to do those things? So my question is, as you're thinking about schedule redesign, how do you help them resist that pressure? And instead really focus on like who they are and what makes them, being authentic to themselves.
I mean, we see exactly what you're describing there, that a school will say, school down the street just added entrepreneurship, engineering, capstone projects. Now we got to add all those things. And another layer of that same dynamic, you've got, schools where students sometimes feel like they're really building up their resumes. They got to load up on a bunch of AP courses. They've got to be part of all these clubs. And then you get teachers complaining that the learning that's happening feels superficial, and the students are just sort of jumping through the hoops for the grades and the transcript. And in the midst of all that, you've got people noticing an uptick in student mental health problems. So it's like, okay, these things are probably all connected. Right. And in the work that we do around schedule redesign, maybe we can try to address some of that. So, when we're working with schools, a lot of it is giving them a moment to step back and consider the less is more philosophy. Think about what things they want to really do well and take pride in. We try to be really transparent with schools that in this process, there's no way that everyone is going to be happy with every detail. That's a fool's errand to try to check every little box. And so inevitably, you're going to have to make choices. You're going to have to consider some trade-offs and make some tough decisions. If you can come at those decisions with clarity and confidence about who you are and where you want to go, then it's going to be a much healthier process for everyone. And you're not going to be nearly as likely to slip into that arms race mentality.
And that's one of the benefits of having an outside party help your school through that process, so people don't get territorial, and they can be a little bit more clear-headed around, like, what are we trying to achieve as a school? And we're able to sort of provide some pushback, as well as some framing that allows, that keeps people from kind of going to their corners and just wanting to advocate for their program, and really, help schools do what they should be doing, which is being very clear about who they are and what they're not. Make those, being able to say no and do so with confidence, and then have the schedule reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such an interesting perspective. And I want to zoom in on it just a little bit more because I think part of that is helping them figure out what are your priorities. Right. And so, how can they do that? Because I imagine, they may have 15 priorities up on the board, and there's no way you can fold 15 things into anything, let alone a schedule. So how do you go through the process of helping them make those like intentional choices and prioritizing?
Yeah, one thing that has worked really well for us is do some modeling, create some sample schools, and say, imagine a school with these priorities. Imagine that they have whittled them down to these 5 or 6 that really should drive the schedule process, and they've put them into ranked order. If you guys can get there, then that's going to make all of these conversations about the schedule details so much easier for everyone. So a little bit of that modeling goes a long way. A lot of it involves, digging into the documents that they already have. Lots of schools have got some really robust information in their portrait of a graduate document, strategic plans, that sort of stuff. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can just do a really good audit of the information that the school already has. We can give them some time to reflect. When we look at those documents, what are you proud of? What are you doing well? Where are you reaching your goals? Where are you falling short? Where do you feel like you keep hitting a wall? And let's unpack some of that. And if we're taking that sort of backward planning approach, that's one way to spare schools from getting into that endless feedback loop, that cycle that's frustrating for everyone. And then lastly, I would say it's often helpful to walk through what sort of recent tweaks have they made to the schedule and why, and what were the impacts of those tweaks. What were they hoping to accomplish, and what sort of things fell short? And talking that through can often get everybody in the right state of mind.
So beyond, doing that work around mission aligned priorities, I imagine there are other steps that schools have to take as part of successful schedule redesign. Like, how do you all approach that? Like, what are some things that schools should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I mentioned that we sort of take a 5-phase approach to it, and happy to share that with your listeners. And I bet that there's a lot, no matter how they're approaching their schedule redesign work, that they can just import into their process. The first, as I mentioned, is that like first phase, the discovery, the listen and learn. Rob mentioned, looking at documents, surveys, focus groups. Even if you're doing your schedule redesign process in-house, don't let your scheduling committee assume they already know, right? Have them engage with the empathy interviews, have them really look for perspectives outside of their own. Help them, again, not think about it as like, well, I'm going to start building my models. Really drive at those hard choices around priorities, values, as you mentioned. Have it be as inclusive as possible. Can you get student voice in there? Can you bring alums in, families? The goal of that phase is, for us as consultants, the goal of that phase is to really get to know the school well, to set the stage of helping people understand what the work is about. It's not just about the schedule. It's about this priority, the values work. And this first phase culminates with a clear articulation of these priorities or design drivers, clarity about what the constraints are, and then also clarity about those rank order priorities. What are we looking for? Because phase 2 is where we're going to start building models. Rob and I build all our models from scratch. We don't have a binder of models, and we build our models from the priorities that a school would give. So I would say to others following a similar process, don't try to build anything until you're very clear about, as engineers would say, what are your design drivers and your constraints. So build some models, and then we go through an iterative process. Phase 3, we get a lot of feedback. We review the models with folks. We always are recentering against the shared priorities, the design drivers that the community has identified, so that when we're looking at different models or looking to make tweaks on them, we're doing it against the identified priorities and not based on someone saying, but wait, this many minutes in language arts. And so phase 3, I think schools should go through is that like iterative process. And part of that will help inform, not only create new models, but help the decision-making process for the administrators. And any head out there knows what I'm about to say, which is like, be clear about who's making the decision, whose voice is going to matter or not matter, and how that final schedule is going to be decided. Because as Rob said, not everyone's going to love them all equally. So having, deciding on the best viable schedule to meet the priorities, and then a phase that, or a step, I should say, that some schools, it would be at their own peril if they jumped over, would be the stress testing part of it. Take the new model and put this year's program, teachers, spaces, students, all the way through it, and see if you can break it.
I was going to ask about that. I love that. Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that we take a lot of time to do is really stress test everything, so that we know that there's going to be bumps and tweaks and lived experience once we deploy the schedule, but we want to minimize that as much as possible by getting ahead, doing as many pre-mortems and stress tests as possible. And then, of course, in preparing the transition, there is that stress testing. It's a lot of the communication. We love working with schools on the schedule redesign process and the professional learning that comes with it. So if schools are moving towards more interdisciplinary work or towards longer blocks, I think it's pretty foolish to say, we want longer blocks. Now go teach in those longer blocks and expect teaching. Right. So we really enjoy working with schools around the professional development and cultural work and the capacity building that comes with working in a new schedule, even if it's something as simple as, great, we put community time in. Okay, but what does that even mean for us, right? How are we going to build program into that? And then for us, we're really proud of the 5th phase of our work, which is the sustain phase. And we stay with schools not only in sort of identifying those priorities, building the models, tweaking, deciding when a school deploys their schedule. So for example, we're with 2 schools right now in phase 5. They're in their new schedule this year. We're meeting with them consistently all year, tweaks, feedback, ideas for future work, etc. So
you're sustaining that iterative mindset through the role.
It won't surprise you that often the conversations aren't really about schedule. It's about the opportunities that come from the schedule. And Rob, I don't know if you want to share the compliment from the one school that we worked with that you were having a phase 5 conversation with about and the priorities came up. That was a great story.
Yeah, in a recent meeting, we were just reflecting on how everything's going during year 1, and some members of their team were saying, the feedback from students, from teachers, from everybody has been really positive. And the part that's really cool is that the things people like about the schedule are the things that we said we were trying to accomplish. So I think, we took that as a big positive sign that the process had gone well, that we not just happy people, but happy about the things we wanted them to be happy about.
Yeah, I want to come back to this iterative phase 3 that you laid out, Meera, because as we over the years, and I've been in different organizations that have had some connection to scheduling, The thing that I've always wondered about is, you're going to roll out this effective, like this big event with a new schedule, right? Like it touches everything. There's no way of getting around it, right? I always thought, like, how do you pressure test it ahead of time? I mean, you can't really beta test it. You can't roll it out, like, or
But Peter,
can
you can. You
you
can.
can? Okay, cool.
A smart move for a school would be, depending on the timeline that they're in each phase, to say, it's I'm making up some dates here, but let's say by December, they think they've landed on their best viable schedule. And maybe Rob is working with the registrar and doing all the stress testing. Meanwhile, the school says, okay, the new schedule, it's a 10-day cycle. We're actually going to take the next 2 weeks, not, plan ahead, right? But
Yep.
we're going to run the new schedule for 2 consecutive weeks on our new 10-day rotation, same classes, same students, and see what it feels like, and actually stress test it live. I would strongly recommend to schools, if they can fold that in, even if it's just for like 3 days or whatever, feel the new schedule. And I think it'll surface where some of the friction points are, but it'll also make space for the kinds of conversations around opportunities that we're always trying to get teachers and administrators to think, not just about the technical side of where do I need to be when, and not just about the challenges of like, oh, this changed and I'm so upset, but also, whoa, wait, you mean the new schedule? We're just working with the lower school. They had math, ELA, all these separate blocks. We kind of helped them move into a core time model with a lot of flexibility, big unstructured, I should not say unstructured, but sort of prescribed core time. And they're now just getting into a place of, oh, we could do interdisciplinary work. We could change how we do math groupings. We could change how the whole third grade collaborates. But, you know, that particular school was on a very, very fast process when we built it. They didn't have time to give it a pilot. But if they had, they might have been able to have those conversations before the official schedule, and the program would be even stronger this year.
So when you work with a school and they pilot, are they piloting it across a division, the entire school, a grade level? Like, how does, like, what might that look like?
A lot of variety there. I mean,
Mm.
even if a school felt like, you know what, let's just try one day where we've got these long blocks and see how that feels to people. There's still a
Interesting.
benefit to that. So even a really tiny pilot can still generate some very, very useful data.
Yeah.
And I would ask a school, whoever we're working with, the committee, to think about where they see either the biggest stress points for faculty, in particular, students as well, and say, can we pilot that part of it? So if it's, we work with a lot of schools that are moving to longer blocks, and you've got teachers saying, I don't know how a ninth grader can sit for 80 minutes. And I'm like, well, there's a question of what's your instruction during those 80 minutes? That aside, let's actually try it. Let's, like, don't just assume that you can't have ninth graders for that long. Like, let's actually try it. And I think getting some of those conversations, getting some of those experiences based on what they are feeling most nervous about, or places where they think they need more feedback in order to better inform the model.
Yeah. I'm coming back to where we started, where, there are the three buckets of kind of motivation to redo the schedule. And one of them is living out values and vision. And so I'm thinking about, mission statements and whatnot, and how that there can be, a real gap on the day to day in terms of, are we living that mission? Are we living our vision? And so I guess my question for you is, like, why is that gap so common? And what are some warning signs that schools should be looking for that maybe they're falling into the gap?
I think the gap is coming because schools generally have a low risk tolerance for lots of good reasons. But, a lot of worries about, if we make this change, what will the parents say? What will colleges say? How are the teachers going to adapt to this change? It often feels safer to keep rolling with what you've been doing than to rock the boat too much. Um, Sadly, that means that the pace of change in education is often pretty slow. Lots and lots of great schools out there can point to some systems that they've been using for 50 years that are not up to speed with the world that we live in right now. Um, so, Yeah, I think in terms of the warning signs that we see, again, going back to those sort of accumulated tweaks, that's often a red flag that a school is due for a more thorough schedule redesign process. Um, you might see a school that, Meera talked about these sort of logistical issues. They're trying to figure out how to cram in meetings for student council, but they're having conflicts with affinity groups and jazz ensembles. And that's another common red flag. Um, run into some sort of daily frustrations where maybe the curriculum and the program have evolved in a certain way, but the schedule hasn't evolved in parallel. And so you've got a school that, maybe they're really excited about project-based learning, but they're working with a schedule that doesn't support it very well. You might have a school that just built some beautiful new performance spaces, but they're noticing that kids are often in this position of having to choose between a music class and an AP course. And so this beautiful space is being underused. See some of those kind of warning signs too. And then I guess the third category that comes to mind is if they have had some recent initiatives that generated some underwhelming responses. So we just did a bunch of PD around thematic curriculum, and the faculty have figured out what they want the themes to be at each grade level. But then what actually happens when they roll it out, these themes feel like this flimsy add-on, and it's not really a thematic curriculum at all. Maybe they unpack that and say, well, we didn't really devote enough, we didn't really dedicate time in the schedule for teachers to work together and make this a reality. Those underwhelming initiatives are another big warning sign for us.
And, what I'm about to add is actually not schedule related, but excuse me, I would be real curious to go to any school and say, to ask any student, faculty member, or staff, excuse me, all right, do you know your mission statement? Yes, no. What are your core values? And then to say, can you tell me, great, hopefully they can state what some of their main things are. Can you tell me 3 things that you're absolutely not about, right? 3 things that you will not do as a school that you are saying no to, and that you're all agreed that you're saying no to those things. And then the same thing is the schedule. Can you look at the schedule and tell me, how does this schedule reflect, the 4 sort of pillars of your school, whatever, they might be. And can you look at the schedule and tell me, like, does the schedule, any of the things that you said that we're not, and that we're all hopefully clear that we're not, which not a lot of schools do a great job of, can you show me how those things don't show up in the schedule, or places where the schedule almost prohibits that from happening? So I see the parallel. You talked earlier, Peter, about the strategic planning. I think that saying no is a big problem for schools. And I think if you can see where in the schedule have we said no, that would be a sign that that gap is closing.
Yeah, we're great at adding things, not so great at taking things away, for sure. Last question as we begin to wrap up today. So imagine a head is listening to this and they're thinking about the schedule. They're thinking about the school's long-term kind of financial health. Where do you see a schedule redesign and influencing enrollment and retention? Not just for students, but for faculty too.
Yeah. And I think, as we said at the top, it's like nobody, I don't know, schools don't they have pictures on their glossy brochures of kids doing amazing things and looking happy. You don't put a picture of the schedule on the front of your glossy.
Yeah.
But if done right, a schedule will communicate, as we said, the values of the school, and it will, to your point about the retention and then the enrollment piece, it should actually communicate the values and the value proposition of the school as well. And people should be able to make those connections. I think a quality schedule that's aligned with those priorities and the vision and values and the value proposition of the school will allow for the high quality delivery of the program. Not just interdisciplinary learning, or not just place-based learning, or not just belonging, but actually it's done well and not just words on a brochure. I think a schedule, we've seen it, a schedule that is not doing that will mean that the program feels stunted. and that things are not feeling right, and you're not getting the results that you want. Kids are not talking about their experience the way that you want. And I think to your point about both students and faculty, and I would say, staff, admin, everyone, I think a schedule, as you pointed out, it dictates how we are every minute of every day. Community well-being, the connection, the thriving, the performance of teachers, of students, is going to depend on the container in which they sit. So it's not just the quality of the building, it's not just the quality of the materials, it's not just the people in the community, but it's the way we organize our time. And so I think when thriving goes up, right, for students and faculty and staff, retention is going to go up. People are going to perform better. People are going to want to be a part of that community. And I'll add that that's for a schedule itself. For the schedule redesign process, I think when it's done right, it can be a force that can really thresh out some important conversations for a school, and then allow for some learning together and some alignment around what we value and what we do, what we don't do, and why. And I think it can transform practice as well. So if done well, we don't just have a new schedule, but we have a new way of doing something within the schedule. So I like, I don't spend a lot of time thinking directly about enrollment and student retention. I think a lot about faculty retention, but it's not hard to draw that line between schedule and retention and enrollment.
And Meera, we were at a conference not too long ago where the sort of State of the Union address was putting out some pretty big warnings to independent schools about challenges to enrollment. Just the sort of bubble of students at certain ages. We're heading into a phase where there will be a smaller pool of students looking for independent schools. Partly due to COVID, we've got a lot of competition out there, a wider range of options for families to be considering, lots of financial uncertainty. All of those things have the potential to be threats to the independent school world. So I would say more incentive for school leaders to be thinking about how do we differentiate ourselves in a compelling way from that school down the road. Not because I get excited about, capitalist competition, but if the net result of that is that we've got schools offering a wider range of options and serving a wider range of needs, that's good for the whole landscape.
Yeah. One last question before we wrap today. If somebody's listening and they want to follow up, what's the best way for them to do that?
Happy to have you shoot us an email. It's real easy. I'm Meera at treyeducation.com, MEERA. Rob at treyeducation.com. Hop on the website, fill out the contact form, find us on LinkedIn. We love being in real connection and community. So your listeners should not be surprised if they reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'll probably say yes, and let's jump on a Zoom and get to know each other a little bit. So that's just how we roll, and we're looking forward to having those conversations.
Fantastic. Meera Shah, Rob MacDonald, Trey Education. Thank you both. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much.